This talk is Chewbacca and Yoda hate ORM. So for me, this started when somebody wrote in the Slack channel, hey, check out this article on why object relational mapping is bad. Now, as many of you know, object relational mapping is the Jar Jar Binks of the programming world. Everyone hates it. But this person had an especially strong dislike for ORM. And I disagree with it. I actually have my own list of grievances with ORMs, but I disagree very strongly with the article. But still, I found it very interesting because it was a very different kind of argument against ORMs that I'm used to. Now, to think about this a little bit more, I started thinking about the layers of abstraction that we work in as developers. You have app developers that are right kind of in the middle. Right? And they actually don't mind ORM that much because they want to move fast. We have Galaxy to save, and ORMs generally let them be productive quickly. Most articles that are critical of ORM use the Chewbacca argument, and Chewbacca is a database administrator. He wants those app developers to stop breaking stuff because he's the one that has to fix it. He doesn't like ORM because it shields the app devs from understanding the mess that they're making in the database and reporting layers. But that wasn't this article. This article was using the much rarer Yoda argument against ORM. And Yoda is an architect that's been living alone in a swamp for 20 years. He trusts strongly in the interface, and his objection to ORM is that it exposes that you have a database at all. It's infecting your business logic with implementation details and passing back objects that are really just dumb bags of data instead of opaque objects with powerful behaviors and internal logic. Now, we all want maintainable systems. We all want simple, understandable systems. And instead of asking who is right, how are they wrong, I think as developers, it's helpful for us to think about when are they right? When would we agree with the positions that are being put forth? Because they both have noble goals. I think Yoda is aiming for interface simplicity. The database, in his mind, the database is just an implementation detail. And he wants to have easier refactoring, fewer bugs, better encapsulation, with the belief that you can properly optimize things under the covers. So he sees a piece of code like this, and he says, well, this is a brittle and confusing way to ask, has the user ever been enrolled in a course? It exposes lots of details, and it should be replaced by an appropriately named method. Chewbacca, on the other hand, wants implementation and operational simplicity. He sees the database as the reality of the data, so he is horrified at this piece of code that it looks like it should run just fine, but it could trigger millions of requests to a database. So stepping back for a moment, let's talk about object-oriented programming in general. Object-oriented programming is great at encapsulation. But what are we encapsulating in this particular instance? Are we hiding the specific details about how a database access happens? Or are we trying to hide the fact that it happened at all? These sound very similar, but the difference has major implications. So to illustrate this example, let's say Yoda wants Luke to make him lunch. All right? So first he says, I'm hungry. Chop an onion. And Luke's like, well, where am I supposed to get an onion? Yoda says, that's an implementation detail. It's not his problem. I don't care if you pull it out of your back pocket or if you have to fly to a distant planet. Just give me a chopped onion. Now, Luke doesn't have one in his pocket, so yeah, he gets in his X-Wing, goes to some distant planet, gets an onion, brings it back, chops it up. And it's great. Then Yoda says, hey, mince me some garlic. Now, never mind where that's supposed to come from, right? It turns out garlic was right next to the onions at the supermarket on the distant planet that Luke just flew back from. So he's pretty annoyed, and he isn't entirely stupid. So as long as he's over there, he's going to pick up a few other likely ingredients that he thinks Yoda will want. And then he's completely surprised when Yoda asks him to boil a frog next. So now Luke's going to a different planet to get a frog. He has no idea what's associated with frogs, but a helpful droid who has no idea who Yoda even is knows a couple of common recipes related to frogs, and so he gives Luke a few extra things to take along with him just in case, and fly all the way back to Dagobah. We do this all the time in our code base. We do it in edX valve, certificates, module store, etc. Yoda might look at functions like these, at methods like these, and think that's fine. The interface is clear enough, and the naive implementations are simple. But Chewbacca looks at this and points out to all the complexity that it adds downstream. You've got Luke trying to guess what Yoda wants. You've got this droid trying to figure out what bundling is going to be useful, and you're wasting all kinds of time. We do this too with request caching and prefetching, etc. All of this happened because Yoda couldn't be bothered to add the fact that these ingredients have to come from somewhere far away into his mental model when designing. Pretending that there is no fetch latency doesn't actually make it go away. It may slightly simplify the interface, but it also vastly complicates the implementation. None of these downstream pieces understand what Yoda has in mind, and they do a bunch of complicated and unnecessary work trying to guess because that's what will make performance tolerable 95% of the time. So can we ignore the data fetch latency is the big question. And if the answer is yes, then hide whether it happens. Yoda's right in this case. Worrying about the details will only complicate your code, and you can just hide the fact that any database access or any data access happens. But if you can't ignore the latency, you should only hide the specifics of how data moves in the system, not the fact that it moved at all. Right, another way to think about it from our making lunch example is that Yoda doesn't need to know how an X-Wing works, but he should understand that going to another planet takes a long time, and he should have made a grocery list for Luke up front. It doesn't make your code less elegant that you have to actually model the reality of where the data lives in the system. Now, what fetch latency you have to care about differs dramatically depending on the work you're doing. L1 cache is, your processor's L1 cache is 100 times faster than main memory access. And main memory access is 10,000 times faster than calling out to memcached. I have never thought about byte alignment for my Python code, but for a game developer, that might be critically important. Different applications need to care about latency at different levels. And for a web developer, database and memcached access times are typically going to be so much higher than everything else that lower level details usually get lost in the noise. But that's not a universal rule. I think that the problem with ORMs, the reason why people get so bitter about it, is that if there is a threshold below which magic is fine, and above which we have to explicitly model and acknowledge the latency, database queries and the ORM queries usually start off below that line, right? You start off, you make a couple of selects on a couple of tables, they're 1 or 2 milliseconds apiece, everything's happy. Then over time, your app grows, things get more complicated, you get a lot more queries, things start adding up, and you feel kind of iffy about it. And then suddenly you're here, and you're doomed, and everything's terrible. And I think this is sort of the path that a lot of people take when they get into a mess with the ORM. And that's it. All right, take care.